Welcome back to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 88, the one big, beautiful war and surveillance bill. In this week in macro, we're going to be covering the macro impacts now that this bill has passed. We knew it was going to pass despite the drama, and we'll go through some of the drama, what it means, what the macro impact is, and also the bit that most people are not talking about, which is the Patriot Act style surveillance that was put in there, and not enough people were debating debating it. Excuse my voice. I'm just gonna get some water. Okay, let's jump straight in. So, if you weren't following along, the U.S. House has passed President Trump's one big beautiful bill, and what is it? Well, it's essentially a $3.4 trillion legislative package that encompasses basically tax reforms, i.e., those that are entitled to certain programs. If you understand the US, the reason it has world reserve currency is because it exports debt globally called the dollar. The dollar is backed by debt. It runs a twin fiscal deficit, i.e., it spends more than it brings in, and it taxes. And it also runs a trade deficit, i.e. it imports more than it exports, which is what allows it to export all of that debt globally. And so what they're doing now, because the dollar is a debt-based Ponzi scheme, whether it's Bidenomics or Obamanomics or Trumponomics, the debt has to increase. So all of the idiots that come out and say, we're going to pay down the national debt, they obviously don't understand that you'd have to simultaneously reform the debt-based Ponzi scheme and structurally change the dollar, which you could do with end the Fed bills like what Thomas Massie puts through. But otherwise, you need to increase the debt. And so Trump is not a fiscal conservative. In fact, he wants to print his way into out of this issue. And so when you have tax reforms, i.e. you reduce the amount of tax, you still increase the amount of money and the amount of debt, but you transfer the savings from the tax reform over to somebody else. So who is that somebody else? So while you implement tax reforms, and look, I'm not a fan of tax. It was implemented in 1913 in income tax to pay the debt on the Federal Reserve debt-based Ponzi scheme designed by the banksters in Jekyll Island. But you've promised a bunch of people stuff based upon them contributing to tax. Now you're taking away some of that, but you're not actually having like savings where people's disposable income increase, because you're increasing the money supply, which means that they pay more inflation, get less benefits, and the money still increases and goes somewhere else. So there is essentially tax reforms. So those that needed Medicare and various other things, if you understand the national debt is mainly war, interest on debt, Social Security, and Medicare, Medicaid, and these other different things as well. So if you can't cut on one of those, then you're not really doing anything else. And so we had this whole farce of the Department of Government Efficiency, and all the Department of Government Efficiency did in the end was save a few $1 billion, which is a speck, but consolidate all of the data into the Department of Government Efficiency, integrate it with artificial intelligence, and now that's being integrated into the one big beautiful bill, into the next building blocks of the surveillance state. And I'll be going through a little bit more around that, and the beta test that happened in the UK, that happened in Gaza, that happened in Ukraine, and is now coming to America, because it was slipped in to the one big beautiful bill. It also allows for significant investments in defense. Now, nobody is attacking America. The only people that attack America are from within its borders, and the fact that you can pay politicians to have open border policy and then do mass deportation so that ICE can profit from the private prison sentence that is building a global network around the world, like in El Salvador, and mass deportations, which gets you a subsidy from the government. You pay the inflation, they get to profit, and you have these privatized militias and military which are being able to, beta test controlling the American people, because they know when you create this much wealth inequality, you create civil war. And when the proof of weapons network starts creating these global wars, which are not defense, covert regime changes, all the other things, you get external wars. And while no one would ever be crazy enough to actually, wage war on America, you end up getting all of this crony capitalism where the money's printed, and then you can benefit from all of this war, and then you can benefit from the rebuild, and you can benefit from all the contracts, and you can benefit financially from all the civil unrest and everything that happens. It is literally asset stripping the Americans and the world based upon this proof of weapons network, which is a layer that sits above government. In part 3, I'll do a reminder and a recap of exactly how it works. And so basically all that money printed, or a significant chunk of it, goes to the companies that profit from war. The Lockheed Martins, the General Dynamics, the Boeings, the Raytheons, and the Lockheed Martins. It also has a big budget for immigration enforcement, which is the bill. This is why the multi-uni-party proof of weapons network installed Biden to do open border policy, then installed Trump in order to do mass deportations that would usher in civil unrest so that they could push out media and propaganda to get you to opt in through one big, beautiful bill that the invasion means that you need to protect your borders, which you may ideologically completely agree with. And based upon pushing out, through the media networks, making everything look really, really bad and creating the environment, you usher in surveillance. And the civil unrest leads to arrests, Guantanamo Bays, new bills where they say you're anti-Semitic if you are protesting for Palestine. And then suddenly you have boycott divestments, BDS types of removals, and these different things that essentially completely destroys your First Amendment, your Constitution. And if you use your Second Amendment, as I've covered in many episodes, then that becomes the justification for the surveillance that's needed. So initially, just like 9/11, they say, well, we're going to take out the terrorists. And then you end up with Patriot Act, where you end up in Guantanamo Bay and various other things. The same thing is happening here. Open borders, mass deportations, anger around an invasion, which is mainly all the sanctions and all the wars that are created by the proof of weapons network as well. And then those sanctioned countries like Venezuela, they can't use their oil. So you end up with a government subject to a covert regime change. And all the violence and all the covert regime changes that are engineered, then they end up wanting to come in through the open borders. Then you fund those groups like M23 in Congo that then happens at M13 in El Salvador. And then they come through the borders. And then you have your other networks like ISIS and Al-Qaeda that the proof of weapons network funds. And then you usher in this surveillance state. And guess who the contractor is that's going to get the benefit from that is in the big, beautiful bill. Palantir and all the different contracts that come from that. It also consolidates all of the data, like IRS data, healthcare data, into a private organization that consolidates the Doge data into Palantir that you're paying in order to say, yeah, they're going to protect the border, but actually it's going to implode and be used upon you because they know that civil unrest and the American people are the real problem they're trying to protect itself from as well. So it's to accommodate, basically the big beautiful bill is to accommodate the crony capitalism of the big spending, the politicians pay these lobby groups, and the bill basically raises the statutory debt ceiling to $5 trillion. What is that? That's where every time you need to review the debt ceiling, so now you can take on another $5 trillion, go beyond $40 trillion of debt. The financial industrial complex get to buy all those bonds, so they get to receive the yield. The stablecoin issues in the technocracy get to receive that yield and buy Bitcoin. That creates inflation for those that don't own assets. That creates more civil unrest, which creates the environment in order to usher in the surveillance state and all the law changes that take away your rights and freedom. This model was beta tested in the UK. We saw this happen through Palantir contracts, open border policy, propaganda in order to perpetuate, horrific things and all sorts of, like we saw it. We beta tested this coming to America. And this was the same thing that they learned how to do in the Middle East, in Asia, in Latin America. But anyway, you've now got an additional $5 trillion. When that $5 trillion ceiling, it doesn't mean that you limit the debt. It means that you renegotiate so that all the lobbyists that paid for all the Congress people to be politicians in the first place, you get to reset and make sure that they're following your policy rather than the people's policy. And this is how the proof of weapons network built its power of this stateless entity that is able to control the political systems and use the investment banks in order to vassalize all the organizations into securities so that the asset managers that are managing your money get board seats and share control so that they can then use artificial intelligence and technology in order to reshape capital markets that the Federal Reserve uses in monetary policy, the Treasury uses in this fiscal policy, and all the asset managers use. And so you have this stateless, unaccountable entity that is able to even use intelligence networks to create wars and profit from it as well. So anyway, this big, beautiful bill ushers in approximately $3.3 trillion. It adds $3.3 trillion to the deficit. And this is the administration that said they're going to be doing Make America Great Again by ushering in controlling the deficit and using tariffs in order to do that so they can rebuild the manufacturing base in America. All gone. And that's why we had a bit of a farce. Now, I'm not 100% sure on whether Elon is a wild card. He's somewhat unpredictable, or whether this is some kind of scripted type of breakup. Because he now gets to break up and focus on the technology he was given by NASA and the military industrial complex. And he can now create his social credit score by integrating Grok into X and preventing freedom of reach, but giving freedom of speech, various other things. But Elon has basically said, if this bill gets through, he's going to back Thomas Massie, who had the End Fed bill, who exposed AIPAC and the Congress members are paid by the Israeli lobby, even though there's much bigger lobbies like military lobby and banking lobby and big pharma lobby. But in order to create this environment, and remember, if you didn't watch last week, I answered the question around the Israel-America relationship, who controls who, and while that breakup is happening and while they're using plausible deniability in order to make sure that these are separated. You can watch last week's episode if you missed that. But essentially, Elon said he'll create a new party. And if this bill passes, he'll back Thomas Massie in the 2028 campaign. Now, look, I support this, but we know, and I'll be covering it more in part 3, that if you want an influence on politics, it's not the politicians. You either need to be rich and use lobby, or you need to recognize that corporates control politics, and so therefore it's only your money that determines whether they listen to you or not. If you can impact their share price, and by impacting share price, you can get overthrow of board members and then less money for lobby, then through boycotting and various other measures, that's how you really impact share price. That's how you engage in the political process. It's your money that gets political process. Everything else is just a farce. And we know that the third party will be controlled by the lobbies. And then we'll have this narrative thinking, all right, so the Democrats are corrupt under Biden. And then once they realize everything that's Trump's done, so Trump is completely corrupt and how much money he made, and he didn't deliver upon any of his promises. We better get Elon and Thomas Massie in, who are the real deal. They got the End the Fed bill. And it's just part of the same system, unless you actually get that End the Fed bill. But that hope and promise of finally a politician doing something means you get a third round of the merry-go-round of distraction, and you end up distracted thinking this time it's all going to change. All we need to do is get this person in and this party in, and you go through the same merry-go-round of distraction, of achieving nothing, and ending up not understanding that the real battle was the corporations that control your government and follow the money, and you can understand how to have real impact. Anyway, Trump came out and said, quote unquote, quote here, "It is obvious with the insane spending of this bill, which increases the debt ceiling by a record $5 trillion in capital like Trump, that we live in a one-party country, the Porky Pig Party," which is true. It is a recognition that the system is just to send money to the corporations. Time for a new political party that actually cares about the people. And guess what? They won't care about the people, because unless you reform the money, you have to increase the debt. Elon, you either know or you don't know. And my guess is because you built PayPal, and because you got Bitcoin on Tesla's balance sheet, and because you own a bunch of Bitcoin, you know. So that draws me to the conclusion that you can't trust him, because the PayPal mafia knows that it's a debt-based Ponzi scheme. And if you ever reduce the debt, then you shrink the dollars. When you shrink the dollar, you create a depression, you destroy the proof of weapons network. When you destroy the proof of weapons network, you end up in a debt spiral downwards, a deflationary cycle, money into other currencies, the unwinding of the IMF system, and you end up resetting the world order, which is what BlackRock wants. And you are one of those high net worth individuals that is a part of the proof of weapons network as well. So this is just a mechanism for making the people believe that something's going to change. And I like Thomas Massie. I'm not sure, whether he's in on this or genuinely believes he can make the change. He follows me on X. He's saying all the right stuff, doing all the right stuff. But let's see. I guess it gives that third attempt at thinking that Americans can change the system. But anyway, Massie, he did what he said he was going to do. He voted against the big, beautiful bill, but it wasn't enough to not get it happen. Right. So what happens? What is the side effects? So that's what the big, beautiful bill is. Essentially, it has more control to the corporations that control the deep state, control the government, and ushers in a surveillance state. So what is happening in the real world? Well, we had some figures this week in the macro side. So unemployment came in at 4.1%. You want that number to be low. So that is a good number, because the expected unemployment number by the market was 4.3%. So it is 0.2% better. Jobs are good. That is a good number. That is a considered a good thing. So it's not stagflation where you have decreasing unemployment through AI. You have increasing inflation and you have decreased growth based upon a recession or anything. We're not there yet, because that's why they needed this stimulus package. Because they want to stimulate through returning inflation, fudging numbers, changing the index. And where are those jobs coming? Well, the largest contributor to the increase in employment came from the government. So the government was the highest contributor to those jobs. So America is becoming a crony capitalist, debt-based Ponzi scheme, technocracy bailed out by stable coins that are ushering in employment through government, an ever-increasing government, and a part of the system that is becoming more and more socialist as it creates the surveillance technology in order to usher in a universal basic income backed by stable coins as you engage in a destabilization campaign and civil unrest as the world transitions to Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs, and the rich are protecting themselves with Bitcoin and issuing stable coins so that they can get the last bit of debt and buy as much Bitcoin as possible as capital outflows, and they invest in a multipolar world rather than leaving America to just be the host nation for the technocracy with the large capital markets to extract as much as possible, just like what happened to Britain, Europe, and is currently actually happening to Israel as well. As we covered, we'll be covering more in part 3 as well. So it is essentially, the big beautiful bill is a government job stimulus. It will lead to more jobs as AI takes more jobs. Those jobs will build the infrastructure to be able to build on robotics and artificial intelligence. And the big beautiful bill is just a revenue stimulus so that you can print more fake GDP, so you can say you're not a recession as the government takes up more and more of the revenue, and you can repackage that GDP into the profits of Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, BlackRock, and all of these other institutions that receive the money and Palantir to make it look like, hey, as we get all this inflation, at least we're growing and becoming more productive. Because if you can make it look like you're growing and the debt is increasing at a slower rate than the amount you're taking on, which it certainly isn't right now, you can pretend that you are okay to take on this debt and you can grow your way out of it. There is a problem with this, though. The problem is that if employment is good and the fake GDP makes the economy look good, and inflation is getting better because of these deflationary impacts and the impact of keeping those rates high, there's no justification to cut the rates at the Federal Reserve level. And that is what Trump needs in order to roll over the debt. Last week, we covered how to roll over $10 trillion of debt. So unless you get a return to inflation, then how are you going to justify cutting the debt? And the debt is $10 trillion that needs to be rolled over this year. And Trump wants to do it based upon short-term debt. So he wants to do what Janet Yellen did. And he wants to install his person at the Fed that will do that, because Jerome Powell is not doing it, whether that's a theater, because they both work for the same financial industrial complex. The Fed chairman is just a puppet for the bank's policy, because the banks are the shareholders of the Fed. And he's just the front man that needs to go into Congress saying all the reasons why he's doing stuff. But Trump wants to roll over the short-term debt because the short-term debt has the lowest interest rate, and there is a problem. As you make the economy worse and worse and worse, the bit that the Federal Reserve doesn't control, which is the price that BlackRock and everybody in the long-term markets and the mortgage producers and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and all the financial industrial complex, the credit card issues, the auto loan issuers, all of those securitized financial products that JP Morgan, Citibank all issue, their rate is going up, the 10-year treasury and the 30-year treasury. And no matter what the Fed does, that's still broken away. So the lower you put the rate, the higher the interest rate is going, because America's becoming more and more of a distressed asset to roll over. And so you have the long-term rate getting higher, the short-term rate on the 1 month, 3 week, 3 month treasuries, if you could force it lower, but you don't have the justification for that, because you don't have the return to inflation and the economy is strong. And that is the dilemma that we are witnessing as we have this rollover of the $10 trillion of debt. That is the dilemma. And that is why we're hitting distressed debt service, but they're still rolling it all over in order to try and pump the stock market so that the wealth inequality gets greater between those that own those shares and those that doesn't have the shares, which is the stimulus package. Now, the proof of weapons network also needs, because I'll talk more in part 3 as a recap. I said by following their balance sheets, you can see that there's a new vision for the Middle East, but you need to make up, the military industrial complex needs to make up for those profits. And so there is a big EU war stimulus so that the Europeans and the Brits can print more money. Now they got their lower interest rates, roll over their debt, and they can spend it into, as a vassal of the proof of weapons network, they can spend it into BlackRock's portfolio companies hosted in America, like Lockheed Martin and General Dynamics. So if you can keep pushing the war machine in Europe, then there's another $1 trillion of revenue to be made of fake GDP for America, so it can pretend that it's not in a recession, so it can roll over further in this proof of weapons network. And now BlackRock has securitized, and essentially Zelensky is a pundit of the proof of weapons network. He's now securitized the IMF debt in order to give BlackRock access to 60% of the land. The rest of it will go in rare earth mineral deals to American corporations, and the rest will go to Russia to control their part of their land. And BlackRock will securitize the rest. Then you can print some more GDP growth, and the proof of weapons network can roll over a little bit further as it prepares for civil unrest. So I covered last week that in the NATO summit, all of the European Union, they're essentially doubling their war spending to 5%. So Trump said, you got to double your war spending, because NATO is just a sell strategy for the military industrial complex and these fake GDP prints based upon the euro dollar system as well. So now that the tariff policies have had their desired impact of ushering in the multipolar world, we start to come to the end of the 90-day deadline. And now we need all of these deals being done that return it back to the stimulus package, which is the big, beautiful bill. So as a result of the big, beautiful bill, the S&P reached new all-time highs based upon the government stimulus and the recognition that it's actually happening. As people were rumoring whether it was going to happen or not, the market would have corrected. The market didn't correct, so we knew it was going to come through because it's a debt-based Ponzi scheme stimulus. It's a war machine stimulus. That's what the big, beautiful bill is from the guy that said, I don't do wars. It's a proof of weapons network stimulus. And that's how you know that all politicians are controlled, and this one is no difference. If you do not own tech, war stocks, banks, and any stocks in general, then those are the people that are going to suffer. Who owns all of that? Concentration of wealth, because almost all of those stocks are held by the highest wealthy around the world, in fact, as well. So if if you don't care about the boycotts, then you can protect yourself by doing what they're doing, owning those stocks. But if you want to boycott the system as I do, then you can just simply exit and opt out. And the way that you've got essentially a war machine stimulus, a surveillance stimulus, and you also have a debt stimulus. The way you protect yourself from a debt stimulus is by owning fixed money supply. Fixed money supply, the two assets are Bitcoin and gold, Bitcoin in the digital, gold in the physical. Otherwise, you suffer. So therefore, you can opt out of the system by owning Bitcoin. You can boycott the Federal Reserve System, and you can have the impact and beat the system historically as well. So Trump essentially campaigned against Biden, his reckless deficit spending, and basically the resulting inflation that Biden allegedly helped to produce, which he did because they're all prostitutes for the proof of weapons network. They work for the lobbies. There is no autonomy there. It's all a farce. And so Biden, that was what the Trump administration said. And so now that Trump got himself in power by saying that and saying he'll protect on borders as the justification for the narrative that's needed for the surveillance state, the same Trump deficit spending will be even more. And that will lead to even more inflation. And if you essentially thought that Biden economics were bad, wait until you get Trumponomics. Because it's the same thing. It's the same flavor. He might get bailed out by the deflationary impact of artificial intelligence, but that will take the jobs. And those jobs then lead to demand destruction because you have to usher in the stablecoin universal basic income from those that are losing their job. And so this is what the debt-based Ponzi scheme takes you to. This is the final years of rollover, and you need to adjust yourself for it. All of the macro indicators are telling us that. Now, why is it that he wants to roll over on short-term debt? Because it's easier to use short-term debt as collateral. So if you have a 1-month treasury bill, you can use that as collateral in order to borrow more. If you've got a 30-year bond or a 10-year bond, you can't use that as collateral because people are like, have you seen America's debt? What is 10-year or 30-year or 20-year going to look like? I got no idea. So the demand for those are a lot lower because the short-term debt means you can use it as collateral and re-leverage further. So Trump wants to do what Liz Truss did. Do you remember Liz Truss? She came along and she used BlackRock's product in order to over-leverage and take the American pension system and use BlackRock's product to create derivative and use it as collateral on the short-term debt. And when she tried to do something crazy, like, offer subsidies between the British people that were choosing between eating and heating because the price of oil and gas was going through the roof, at the same time as saying we're going to do cutbacks in tax, it broke the whole system. And she was fired by the Bank of England Proof of Weapons Network because essentially it broke. And then they were able to get the BlackRock financial products in. But it is exactly the Trump strategy, leveraging short-term debt and using the BlackRock strategy in order to lever up and get more and more leverage and more rollover so that the BlackRock portfolios benefit from that. This is essentially what Starmer in the UK has continued to do in the UK. Starmer basically sent billions and billions of dollars that was printed from the Bank of England to the Proof of Weapons Network. He got to do some of it to the military industrial complex in the UK, like BAE Systems, for the Israeli side. But he got to do the most of it for Ukraine by essentially sending money over to Zelensky. Zelensky then would buy it in the America. The Bank of England would print the money. And you have USAID, which is the organization that was controlling both the BBC and the Ukrainian media in order to spread propaganda to make people think like we were defending democracy when this was a NATO war via the Proof of Weapons Network that escalated through NATO in Ukraine in order to agitate a war with Russia. Russia, a military equivalent that has more nuclear weapons than America, so that it could destabilize Europe, vassalize it into a BlackRock colony further and further and further, so that now BlackRock can use the European Union, the UK, now I believe it's doing the same with Israel and America, and it can now use that in order to essentially print more money, create destabilization campaigns, and beta test its surveillance technology. Interestingly, there was some evidence this week. 100 BBC journalists came out and they were complaining about being forced to give pro-Israeli propaganda. And there was a campaign. They left the BBC. 100 journalists said we were being forced and told what to say. So we know who controls the media. We know how this gets funded via these NGOs. And we know that the BBC is a tool for the Proof of Weapons Network. And this was exactly the same as what happened in Ukraine in order to get people to want to believe that they're fighting for their sovereign and they're fighting for their country in a war they just can't win. And now Zelensky is recruiting 18-year-olds, taking them off the street because they're persuading through this media for the Ukraine to fight to the last Ukrainian. Like, this is how the Proof of Weapons Network works. And what is Ukraine doing? They were borrowing from the IMF. The IMF was using that as collateral through these BlackRock financial products that basically allowed BlackRock to end up with all the wheat fields and all of the 60% of the land that it now essentially has control over through collateral, which it can then use for the whole Build Back Better campaign, as its portfolio companies will benefit from the rebuild, as the military industrial complex benefits from it, and the financial industrial complex issues all the loan and receives all of the interest on that. So that's the model. And you think our governments are in control? You think MAGA is about the American people? I saw what happened in Europe and UK, and it has come into America, and it's even happening in Israel right now, because Israel is no longer a strategic asset to the Proof of Weapons Network because its brand has been destroyed. It has been exposed thanks to the resistance against it, social media as well. And of course, they get all their rare earth minerals and all the components that the Proof of Weapons Network needed for their artificial intelligence and robotics economy that it's being invested in. So Americans, Europeans, and Brits pay the bill, and they create the inflation. The inflation leaves you choosing between eating and heating if you haven't invested in the assets that benefit from the proof of weapons network. And the inflation is exported globally through the Bank of International Settlements. And then when there is civil unrest, Palantir obtains the contract. So who did Palantir beta test? Well, it got contracts with the UK Department of Defense. It got contracts with the UK National Health Service. It got contracts with the UK border control systems. And we saw that it installed people like Tommy Robinson to create civil unrest, who was employed through Mossad in order to usher in this national movement against a Muslim invasion, which is a beta test for the exact thing that is happening in US right now. So the UK was the complete beta test for the civil unrest campaign that leads to more contracts with Palantir and the BlackRock proof of weapons network vassalizing the country. So you just become a tool for the corporate interests that sit on the top and control the government. And Palantir was the same technology that beta tested genocide as a service in Gaza. I said to you, if you allow it, it's coming to you. And they also beta tested occupation as a service in West Bank. And I said that if you allow for this, this is coming to you. And they also beta tested in Saudi Arabia during Hajj crowd control in order to make sure that every aspect of how you control people, that was beta tested there. And now, thanks to the US Big Beautiful Bill, the beta test is coming to America and is being used upon the American people, because the whole collective West and that fake democracy in Israel is being vassalized into the proof of weapons network. And you fell for it because you listened to the media. But obviously, if you were listening to Bitcoin Hard Talk, you were protected all along and you watched it. And you've been stacking your Bitcoin, protecting yourself, and beating the proof of weapons network and boycotting through peaceful proof of work. So in America, the destabilization campaign continues. In the past 24 hours, what have we seen? We've seen Trump, who was the agent of destabilization, basically, he threatened Elon Musk to pave way for the next narrative of, we can take back our country. He was also coming after Thomas Massie, who didn't vote for the Big Beautiful Bill. He also came after Japan. Who's Japan? The largest foreign purchaser of US treasuries that is not going to engage in, that is now reset and is moving further towards BRICS, because the tariff policy meant that it started using its fiscal and monetary policy for its own people, rather than the Bank of Japan being a vassal bank for speculators and hedge funds. And so it is leading to the breakup of that relationship, again, strategically weakening the dollar, removing the soft power so that we can usher in this multipolar world, which is the BlackRock strategy. It even came after a judge in Israel, a judge in Israel, because he is part of the exit strategy for Netanyahu that we'll cover in part 3. Basically, Washington has paid for 70% of Israel's military costs, basically since October the 7th, 2023. That's why it needs more stimulus as well, because it needed to beta test through the Palestinian lab the technology that it wants to use as its surveillance state as well in America. And so the Big Beautiful Bill, essentially, so it came after Israeli judges in order to, because the judge was coming up, the judicial system, which Netanyahu tried to overthrow, that was leading to protests before the operation of October the 7th, which was allowed to happen. And then the Hannibal Directive was implemented, where Israel killed its own people and then created atrocity propaganda. Go to my blog, Atrocity Inc., to make up mass sexual violence and mass killings that it said was, which some of those did happen, but that was an operation which led to the destruction and the beta test of all the technology. So At the same time, grants have been awarded essentially 7.4 million, basically students that were awarded grants during 2025 and 2026. They're going to be 23% of them is going to be cut down to $5,700 per year. Now, remember, I want smaller government. That's my ideology. I like hard money, and I like government to be not used as crony capitalism. But this is still crony capitalism. This is increasing $3.3 trillion on the budget deficit, $5 trillion on the debt ceiling, $1.3 trillion stimulus to crony capitalism. So if even the people, the American people, the students that are taking on all the debt, they get cut, and it's not a saving at all. It's still going over to the large multinational corporations. So how much of that is actually going over to Israel as well? Well, $17.9 billion in direct aid, which is approximately $4.86 billion in Pentagon regional operations, has already been sent through under Trump and the Biden side. $20.3 billion in defense arms deals. Remember, that gets spent back in America to create fake GDP to prop up the proof of weapons network so that you get more inflation and you pay the bill. Billions more in shipping losses as a result of this. Stockpile transfers that needed to go around different areas. Corporate handouts, lashed out. Basically, that all gets redirected. So in the end, in order to save Netanyahu and make him look like a hero, Trump lashes out and said, "Oh, hey, he's a hero." While all of the people around in America are protesting against those actions. Trump decided in his destabilization campaign to lash out at the CEO of AT&T, just say, forget putting the tariff price up. That's your fault. He also came out at Jerome Powell in order to create this whole destabilization campaign between the Federal Reserve and Treasury. At the same time, the U.S. housing regulator basically called upon Congress to investigate the Fed chair, Jerome Powell. And so you're getting the fabrics of soft power all leading to capital outflows, but only investing in the Magnificent Seven, the artificial intelligence, the robotics infrastructure, the energy based upon controlling, I believe, through BlackRock strategy via its control of its puppet government, the Trump administration, to usher this in as well. As I said right from the beginning, Liberation Day was to liberate the world from the dollar through a multipolar world order. Then it would return back to its business as usual because the debt can never be repaid and the banks would never allow its subsidy from the debt to go. So in this continued destabilization campaign, we're coming to the end of this 90-day, which is meant to be 10% tariffs everywhere. And so Trump also came after Canada. Trump ended basically its trade talks with Canada. Canada is basically removed its what is called its digital service tax, which was meant to be on America in order to try and regain conversations. Now, remember, Canada and Mexico are the US largest trading partners and at their border. And so Canada is a much bigger partner than China. So, although it is 100% dependent upon China, as I've always said, for some of its imports, it is now coming after its biggest trading partners. It's nothing more than a destabilization campaign as well. It also, in the last 48 hours, he started lashing out on Truth Social on Thom Tillis, a Forbes reporter. He also came after Harvard University. He also came out after migrants, legal migrants, who he said are being eaten by Burmese pythons in the Everglades, while at the same time releasing a new line of colognes and a new brand of telephones. And so you're getting these new products that are coming out. As I said, the Trump administration is really, really cashing in on this destabilization campaign. And so what are we waiting for next? So today is a holiday in America. And next week is the end of the 90-day extension by which Trump said we'll have the deal done and we'll have all our negotiations said. So Trump said that he will not extend the 90-day deadline, which ends next week on July the 9th. And instead, the US will make essentially a trade. He basically said, I doubt the US will make a trade deal with Japan. Japan, the largest purchaser of US treasuries while they're trying to roll over $10 trillion. And the Bank of Japan, which would allow for the free money for the hedge funds to collateralize and purchase some of those treasuries as well. So Trump said that he was going to start sending letters to countries by next Friday. And that is, the letters are going to notify to all of the different countries basically what their tariff rate is. And there's going to be no more negotiations, he's saying. And so those letters are going to be sent out, and we'll see what happens in this destabilization campaigns. He also added that they would have to start paying the duties by the 1st of August. So the money is meant to be coming in by the 1st of August, which is when the prices will go up based upon all the businesses that import and are dependent upon that. If it happens, the market's not quite taking it seriously. So that creates more volatility opportunities for the hedge funds and those that are managing the currency risks for the countries. That's the next step. So we find out on the first. He always creates lots of good content for me to cover in the macro section. You know, the end result is America's not a reliable partner. So invest in the multipolar world order, and that is BlackRock strategy, as I said. What else have we got? Basically, the net result of all of this is it transfers power. It is way from Main Street over to Wall Street that's constructing the deals. The small businesses get gobbled up into the large businesses, and the large multinational corporations end up benefiting from this, and they're able to offset any of the tax through their multinational structure. So that's the net impact. Now, remember, when you cut taxes through debt financing, essentially what you're doing is you're cutting taxes, increasing the debt. Then this is the classic playbook, how you benefit the proof of weapons network. You're essentially enriching the 1% and burdening the future generations with more debt. That's the classic playbook. And that's exactly what the Big Beautiful Bill will do. And that will be impacted, and people will get to see that as well. But it's not Trump. Trump is a puppet for the corporations that are vassalizing all of the different states, because the banks are able to securitize everything, and the owners of those assets get to control. And if you don't manage your money by investing in Bitcoin and keeping it simple, you hand it over to BlackRock. BlackRock becomes more powerful, and then BlackRock is able to exert more control as the banks essentially print the money. Then they get to buy the bonds. They get this head start in Genius Act to offer the yield on those stable coins. And now the stablecoin issuers essentially benefit from any runaway or higher rates, but they don't benefit if the rates come down. So there's a bit of a conflict in strategy, but the longer term rates go up, which is the truth. So Big Beautiful Bill is a complete wealth transfer on its US citizens based upon having a debt-based Ponzi scheme. Until you reform money, no tax reform will prevent any of that as well, which is why Musk must understand that. And Musk is probably an agent for making Americans think next time will be different. It might as well, this whole policy, just like it was written for the UK, the destabilization campaign, Palantir, civil unrest, all that stuff, This might as well have been written by BlackRock because it's using the UK model and it's the exact same thing. So US Treasury Besant, he came out this week and he said, why would we borrow longer, longer term at these rates? So he's confirming the strategy is roll over at shorter term rates. Why would we borrow longer? Because it's pushing up the long-term rates, justifying while you roll over on the short-term debt, creating a real constant mortgage scenario, and then trying to get the Federal Reserve to cut them while the longer-term rates go as that strategy. So as part of the destabilization campaign as well, the US is actively calling for massive interest rate cuts. And he even said they should be about 1%. That's like a 3 basis point correction. And he is actively pushing out the narrative and everything he needs to say in order to replace the Fed Chair Powell with somebody who will basically immediately cut rates to unprecedented levels. Meanwhile, stocks are at all-time high. This is a stimulus for the wealthy. Real estate prices, they're based upon the longer-term debt, the 10-year and 20-year. So this is really a particularly commercial real estate, which is the backbone of some of the banking system, which then leads to socialized losses, privatized gains, a return to quantitative easing eventually. And then the Federal Reserve can reset the order and basically have the whole government at its knees, which it does, if it can return to, controlling some of the shorter term rates as well. The US debt reaches its all-time high. And accordingly, crypto is also starting to reach its all-time high. But Bitcoin is a two-way trade. It benefits from the debt-based Ponzi scheme, but it is a solution as the debt-based Ponzi scheme unfolds. And that is the beauty of Bitcoin. And that is why own more Bitcoin each month than the previous month. You get to boycott the system. You get to become sovereign. Historically, you beat in every single asset class. And you can simplify your life so you don't need BlackRock to manage it for you. There's basically never been a time in history where the Fed cut rate would come back to 1% from here. And this would probably pump stock prices and create a real crazy cycle around the mortgage markets and what that would do to banks and just enter into massive uncertainty. So when is Fed Chair Powell coming out? Well, he is due to leave in May 2026. And that is when he officially steps down at the end. And maybe after that or before that or whatever happens, Trump, if we are to believe him, which we don't believe a damn thing, he'll install his own person and then be cutting rates to 1%, which would be a massively inflationary move and a return to inflation as that all rolls out throughout the Trump administration. It would send the long-term borrowing rates through the roof. And that would impact the real estate market, credit markets, auto loan markets, student loan markets, and just turn America into an emerging market, distressed debt to make the rich get richer. And now you've, at least with the big, beautiful bill, got your control surveillance state. Meanwhile, what's happening in the rest of the world? Well, India basically unloaded all of its US sanctioned oil tankers, which it was sending to Iran during the Iran-Israel war. So the BRICS network is flowing perfectly as usual. Basically, they take the oil tankers, they change the name on them, and they basically, all of the tankers are using as oil, going as usual. So basically, sanctions no longer work. That supports BRICS, which was the reason for BRICS. The number of oil, gas, and gas drilling that is happening in the US, it has now declined for a 9th consecutive week. So for 9 weeks, oil produced in America has declined. That is the longest streak since basically the COVID lockdown in 2020. And Trump's basically campaigned upon the old drill, baby, drill will support oil. Yet, he's given less drilling to America, or less drilling is happening than under Biden. And so all of the narratives is, this presidency isn't so far a drill, baby, drill. He wants to get the price of oil down. Oil down means less profits for the drill, baby, drill corporations because he needs to control inflation. And the only way to do that is through deflationary impacts, decreasing the price of oil, and the losing jobs through artificial intelligence and robotics. And so at the same time as the number of oil barrels are decreasing for a 9th consecutive, which is eating into the strategic petroleum reserves eventually, it may anyway, as it starts to get there. Iranian oil exports to China reached a record of 1.83 million barrels a day between June the 1st and June the 20th. So throughout that whole time, the oil exports were carrying up and increasing. So we reached the end of the 90-day tariff war negotiations. We'll be covering it in future episodes. It's due to expire next week on the 9th of July. We'll see what happens. We're meant to get a China deal. Trump announced that in 2 weeks, we'll find out what's going to be happening with TikTok. Is that the Trump deal? Is that the China deal? Is that what it is going to be? We'll see. Anyway, more uncertainty, more destabilization. And in the meantime, what's been happening with the dollar? So the dollar measured by DXY, which is the dollar measured to a basket of currencies, the biggest one being the euros, throughout the big beautiful bill, it's now fallen not just below 100, not just below 99, not just below 98, but now with the implementation of the big beautiful bill, it's fallen below $97 as the stock market reaches new all-time high. This is essentially structured into the proof of weapons network. The proof of weapons network is issuing debt today in order to fund the crony capitalism that it benefits from. It's basically, it kicks the repayment to tomorrow, at which point it can hedge, and then it can benefit from the volatility in between. It's not a flaw. It's not some type of bug in the system. It's exactly how the Federal Reserve designed the system, and it's evolved into this proof of weapons network. And you need to protect yourself. That's why I encourage the protection for macro is to just own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. It was designed to do the opposite through proof of work than the proof of weapons network. And this week as well, Texas governor, he came out and he signed a new law making gold and silver legal tender in the day-to-day financial transactions of the US. So if you want to protect yourself with gold, it probably ends up in custody. And so you need to solve the self-custody problem, which is easier to do in the digital world than the physical world. And that is everything I've got for this week in macro at Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 88, the big, beautiful war and surveillance bill. I hope it covered the bits that maybe you didn't get covered anywhere else. But do me a favor, if you enjoyed that, we're going to be moving into part 3 this week in Geopolitics. And we're going to do a quick recap. I talked about the proof of weapons network. We'll do a quick recap on what the proof of weapons network is, and then everything that's happened this week and how we know where it's going next in the geopolitical side so that you can get ahead of the macro. And then the Bitcoin side tends to lead these moves as well, and you can protect yourself. And also, I want to go through one big victory of showing that if you're getting despondent with the political process because you have no influence, how we can actually have an influence. I want to show a case study towards the end of a successful operation. So with that in mind, just before we move to part 3, what I'd love for you to do is head over to YouTube. We are very close to 100,000 subscribers. I think we've got 500 more to go. Hit the bell symbol, hit all, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Once we get to 100,000 subscribers, we're going to get a review by YouTube, and I can make sure we get unshadow banned. But if they block me, head over to X and follow me there. We stream there and I go live. You can ask me questions on X Spaces and you can come up to the stage. If you don't follow me there and everything goes wrong, we'll go over to Rumble, which hopefully won't censor me. You can follow me there. I got a small following that we're building just in case this channel gets taken out. Also, you can download on Apple podcasts, and you can also do the same on Spotify. Watch this bit by bit. Do it no extra time as you're running in the gym, as you're driving. You can download it and come back to it so you don't miss a thing. And finally, head over to simondixon.com, where you can get a free membership to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, where we back everything up on our own infrastructure so that no matter what happens, we've got it all